Okay, so before we get into the actual coding part of it, let's answer three questions. What is a OTP and why OTP is needed, and how we are going to automate this entire process. So let's answer the why part first. Why there is a huge adoption of OTP in all of the mobile app and web app nowadays, right? It is because of large number of security threats out there. Like there is a phishing attack, there is a social engineering attack, there is a brute force attack. Everyone out there is trying to steal somebody else's login credentials, right? So that's why OTP was introduced. It is a second form of authentication that is provided by the user who is trying to log in order to authenticate himself. Now, what is an OTP? OTP can be a random sequence of digits. It could be either 4 digits or it could be 6 digits. And in some cases, it could be a combination of alphabets and numbers as well. So in the backend, it uses three parameters to basically create this particular random sequence. So the first parameter is the secret value. So this secret value, it is more like a password that is associated to a particular user. It is very unique to that particular user. And second thing, a particular algorithm is used by the system that vends this OTP. It can be a SHA-based algorithm. It can be any type of algorithm, but an algorithm is used. And third factor is the validity. An OTP can be valid for 15 minutes, or in some cases it could be valid for 15 seconds also. There is one other parameter that is considered as an input for OTP generation, that is the current timestamp of the system, which is vending that OTP. All these four parameters together makes up as an input for the generation of OTP. So once the user has the sequence of digits, right, he'll be entering it during his login. And once the user has entered his OTP, the service which received this OTP will generate its own sequence of digits based on its current timestamp and the secret of the user, and it will come up with its own sequence of digits, and it will compare that sequence of digits with the OTP provided by the user. If both are matching, then he'll be allowed to log in, otherwise the user would be blocked. Now we are going to see the brains or the code logic which is used to generate the OTP for us inside the AWS Lambda function. So this is the piece of code that we are going to use today. So I'll walk over this code line by line. So we are using a JSON library to actually parse the request. So we are using a JSON library. We are using an open source library called pyotp, which basically generates the OTP by taking the user secret key as the input, and how long the validity is, how long we are expecting the validity of the OTP to be. So this is the AWS Lambda function. So whenever a Lambda function is getting invoked, it will receive two object instances. One is the event, another one is the request context. We are not worried about the context as of now, so we are only worried about this particular event. So this event is more or less like a JSON. So we'll see how this event looks like. So this is the event structure. Like whenever you invoke a Lambda function, the AWS Lambda will receive this entire JSON, and whatever is required from this JSON, we can parse this JSON and fetch it. So it usually contains, API request, right? It contains headers, it contains query strings, it contains a request context, like from what account this API request has been triggered, and if suppose if the AWS suppose if the API request contains a JWS based authorizer, then it will contain those details as well. What type of request is it is, and what is the path of that API request body. But for this particular automation, we are only interested in this body part. So this body part of the event contains the API request body. So the API request that we are going to trigger, it will be present the request body will be present inside this request body. Here it is given as a string, but in our case it will be coming as a JSON. Okay, so moving back to the Lambda code. So we receive the event, and from that event we are getting the body, the body part of that event, and we are storing it in a variable called request body, and we are converting that request body or parsing it into a JSON using the JSON library, and from that we are extracting the secret key and we are storing it in a variable called secret, and we are then invoking the TOTP function of that open source library by passing in the secret parameter that we parsed, and we are defining the interval. So this is how long the OTP is valid for. This is basically in seconds. That means the OTP that we are going to generate is valid for 30 seconds. Now we invoke the now function on the TOTP, which ultimately vends the TOTP code, and the TOTP code is dumped into the API response. Now we are in the AWS console. First thing that we are going to do is we are going to create a new AWS Lambda function with the code that I have explained just now. So we are going to create a function, and let's name this function as OTP generator, and this function runs on Python. Let's leave everything else to default. Click on create function. The new function is successfully created now, and you could see the function is getting loaded, and this is the default Lambda function code. Now we are going to replace this particular function code with our own code. Yeah, we have replaced the code, and we are going to click on the deploy button to update our change, and it's successfully deployed. There is one last thing that we need to do with this particular Lambda configuration. The pyotp library that we are using is an open source library, and it is not available to AWS Lambda by default. So we need to create a layer, and we need to add this pyotp as a dependency to that layer. We'll see how to do it now. Click on this hamburger icon, click on layers, click on create layer, and let's name it pyotp. This dependency needs to be added as a zip file. So we have to basically create a zip file out of the dependency. And I'm selecting the configuration, compatible configuration as both. And I'm selecting the Python runtime as 3.12 as well. Okay, let me open my terminal. What we are going to do is this pyotp is an open source library. So in order to add it as a dependency, we have to install it into a particular folder. We have to zip it, then we have to upload it here. So in order to do it, in order to do this, please follow the steps that I'm doing right now. So first we are going to create a directory called Python. Okay, so it is already existing. So let's see, it is an empty directory as you can see. And once the directory is created, so you could see that this is an empty directory and this doesn't have anything. Now let me run this particular command, pyotp -t python. So this what basically this command does is it installs pyotp inside this particular Python directory. This is a Python based command. So as you could see, the installation is successful. So you could also notice that we have pyotp libraries that are installed in this particular directory. Now we will run one more command that will basically zip this into a zip file. Okay. So zip -r layer.zip. So this is the output directory, and we are going to recursively zip everything that is present inside this Python directory. Now hit enter. Now we have a zip file. You could see the layer.zip is there. Now let's drag and drop it and click on create. The pyotp layer dependency is successfully created. Now let us go back to Lambda and attach that particular dependency layer to this particular function. So if you scroll to the bottom, you'll be having a section to add layer. Click on add layer and choose custom, and you'll be getting the layer that you have created just now. Select one as the default version, click on add. Now the Lambda part is done. Let's get to the AWS API gateway part. Okay, so the second thing that we are going to do is we are going to create a REST API using AWS API gateway, and we are going to make that API call our Lambda function that we just created. So go to AWS API gateway, come to REST API section, click on build. Let it point to new API. We'll give it as new name, test util, or let this be in small letter, test util. Leave everything else default. Click on create API, and this basically created a new API for us. Now let us create a new resource, and let's name this resource as generate OTP. Click on create resource. A new resource is created. Now we are going to create a new method. So our API needs a request body. So we are going to create a post method, and this particular method, it is going to call our Lambda. So we are going to choose proxy Lambda integration, and we are going to choose the and we are going to choose the Lambda function that we have created, and leave everything else to default and click on create. Now you could see that we have created a simple API. There is one last thing that we need to do. We need to specify the content type of our request body as application/JSON. Once we are done with it, then we are all good to go. So come to integration or come to method request and click on edit, and choose request body and click on add, and here choose application/JSON and leave the model as empty and click on save. Right, so once you have done this, you'll be getting something like this. And the last thing that we need to do is we need to deploy this particular API. Select new stage, and you could give it as beta and click on deploy. Yes, now our API is ready. Okay, now we need the request URL. So go to the post request, and you could see the invoke URL. We are just going to copy it. Let us create a new request, and let's paste the request body. It is a post request, and let us use the same request. Now let us use the same request key that we have used earlier, and select raw and paste it here and click on send. We have successfully generated an OTP by taking in the secret key. Now I'll tell you how you can fetch a secret key from the QR code. I'll show a small piece of video for that. Stay tuned. Now we are going to see how to set up the OTP generation part for Gmail. So we are going to turn on two-step authentication for a Google account, and we are going to use our own OTP generator for the authenticator app. So for that, we are going to the two-step verification step on Google account, and we are going to select the authenticator app part of it, and we are going to click on setup authenticator. This will basically show us the QR code. So we are going to fetch the secret key out of this QR code by using a QR code scanner app on Android. So if we scan that QR code, we'll be getting the value that is encoded in that QR code. Let me copy paste it into a text editor, and you could see the secret key inside that QR code. You could see here, right? So this is the secret key that we need to use in our API in order to generate the OTP. So we are going to generate the OTP out of it, and we'll be clicking on next button in the Authenticators app, paste that OTP, click on verify. So once this is done, then that means the authenticator or OTP util that we have set up is all complete, and we can use the same secret key again for generating a new OTP or a new OTP sequence that would be valid every time we log into our Google account. So this completes the automation part of it. So whichever account that you want to automate for the OTP, this is a one-time setup. Once this setup is done, you can use the API to generate OTP whenever you need. Thank you so much, buddies. Thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, please don't forget to leave a like and stay tuned for future updates by clicking on that subscribe button. Thank you so much.